When done correctly, there's a lot to be said for being assertive. It's empowering, it can really boost your self-esteem. But our next guest says too often we can get caught in what she calls the Diva Doormat syndrome. Lois Barth is a motivational coach, and she's back to explain exactly what that is. So, Lois, I suppose it's true. A lot of women, I would say, struggle with being assertive because there's that fine line where you're almost mean, I would say, right?
You got to be really careful. Absolutely.
But there's also the Diva Doormat syndrome.
Exactly.
Explain that to us.
My little Loisism, of course.
Of course.
Diva Doormat is what I call the flip-flop. You know, when we're trying to create new behaviors in our life, as you know, Teresa, we often will swing the pendulum both ways. So the diva comes from a sense of entitlement, but not the positive entitlement, the kind of self-righteous, I deserve it, I want it yesterday, which of course really puts people off.
Sure.
And then there's the doormat, the other side, which is like, well, maybe, perhaps you can, if you don't mind, where you don't really set boundaries and you let people walk all over you. And then you get resentful. So it's really about finding the middle ground of having deliberate communication where you're expressing your needs with elegance, grace, and power.
Well, how do we go about doing that exactly?
I know, it's a process, right? Well, I think the first thing is, you know, I talk a lot about the 3 A's, awareness, attitude, and action. And I think the first thing is to really be aware. What trap do I fall into? Am I more the diva, or am I more the doormat, or what happens? What's the contributing factors to go each way? So awareness is always a first start.
All right, in the beginning of the show, we were talking about dealing with difficult situations, stressful situations.
Right.
What should you do if you're upset?
It's a good question.
Rather than lashing out, I guess.
Exactly. Well, the first thing, I joke around with clients that I work with in terms of in work situations when they're angry, I say, do an email, and then the 3 magical words, save as draft, yes.
Don't send it. Take a couple minutes to think about it, right?
You got to find ways. I always say, you know, kind of get curious versus critical. You know, because what happens is what we do is when we're upset about something, we either criticize ourselves, how do we let this happen, or criticize the other person. So I say use those situations as like opportunities for growth. I call them FOGs, fabulous opportunities for growth.
Oh, little acronym there, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
You also say it's important to untrigger. What do you mean by that?
Well, kind of like what I said, Teresa, often when, I don't know about you, but when I get angry, it's like, whoa, you know,
You need a breather, right?
Exactly. You see red. So the first thing is you've got to know what your triggers are so you can untrigger. You know, one of my contractors is, he mines for gold, and I think it's a very similar metaphor. And he says he has to go through a lot of mud and dirt before he sees the gold flecks. And I think that way about when something comes up for you. You got to mine through the muck. So untrigger. I call my friend Vicky, and I say, Vicky.
Have a go-to person?
Yes,
That's a great secret,
I
right?
have a goddess vent. That's what I call it. And it's not about dumping or complaining. It's about getting it out so we can find what the gold is underneath, which is what are the needs that need to be addressed? How can I be communicating my needs more powerfully? What do I need that person to know? So those are the things that I find. Some people love to work out. Journaling is helpful. But do not have those conversations when you're triggered. Really important.
Well, what if you need to have those conversations? You need to kind of get your point across. How do you do it without being rude or come across angry?
I think the first thing is a deep breath.
Sure.
Several of them. You know, like a little mini yoga. Whenever possible, if you can excuse yourself and go to the ladies' room and take a couple of nice deep breaths and just untrigger. But some of the sentence stems that I like to say is if somebody does something that I'm uncomfortable with, I say, well, I'm curious about something.
Like, why would you do that? I guess that's kind of
why would you do that?
Not so standoffish.
Exactly. I'm curious, you said A, but then B happened, so what happened
to
close
tactful.
that gap? Right? Inside, you might be like, "Ugh," but it's what comes out of your mouth.
It makes a big difference.
Absolutely. Curiosity becomes an open conversation with you and the other person.
Lois, tell us quickly about your book.
Yes. Life is Talking. Are you listening? And it's an audio book, and it's the 3 A's, as I mentioned, awareness, attitude, and action to creating a life you love.
Got it. And where can we find it?
On my website, loisbarth.org.
I love it.
Yes.
Some very good Loisisms. Thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure, Teresa. Always great to see you.
All right, and for more information, you can always log on to WTNH.com and click on Style and find everything you need to know about Lois. Up next, we're cooking Italian style. Anthony Romano shares a favorite recipe right after the break. We'll be right back.